To understand why the Great Pyramid was built, we must start from the beginning. There was a time in our species' distant past when there was no structures on the Giza Plateau. In ancient antiquity, geniuses made the commitment to design and build their massive construction project, known in modern times as the Great Pyramid. The Great Pyramid stands today as stark testimony of the original builder's accomplishments. The purpose of this structure must have been as great or greater than the expense to build it. What purpose would justify such a massive project? Was it built to intern a leader's dead body? Was it built as a Bible in stone to confirm Bible prophecies? Was this massive structure created to point to stars for some symbolic reasons? Was the Great Pyramid's purpose to be a storehouse of innumerable profound correlations and alignments? There is another explanation for why the Great Pyramid was built. That explanation is that it was designed and built to be a machine which functioned as infrastructure. This alternative explanation contends that the Great Pyramid was built to help people in a tangible way. The explanation we are exploring for the purpose of the Great Pyramid machine was that it was built to be a water pump. We are starting at the beginning before the Great Pyramid was built, before the complex interior was created, before even a single stone was moved and set in place, before any passageways were cut into the solid bedrock. All that existed was the mound of solid bedrock that the Great Pyramid was built over. The Great Pyramid was built over a solid mound of bedrock. The exact size and shape of this mound cannot be determined because it is covered by the Great Pyramid. Virtually all researchers agree that before any of the Great Pyramid structure was built, the subterranean chamber and associated cuttings were created in the solid bedrock. Before the Great Pyramid structure was built, and before the Great Pyramid's interior was built, the subterranean chamber and cuttings were created deep below the surface of the Giza Plateau. In effect, all you could see was the opening for the descending passage and the opening for the passage which led to the grotto. There was a time during the construction process that just these two small openings was all there was to see at the Great Pyramid construction site. Certainly other preliminary procedures were being conducted, which are described in our first video series, as well as my first book, Lost Technologies of the Great Pyramid. But as for the assembly of the Great Pyramid, no stones were moved or set in place until after the subterranean chamber and cuttings were finished. Let's take a preliminary look at the subterranean chamber and passages cut into the solid bedrock. This is a cutaway view of the subterranean cuttings. There is the long descending passage, the grotto, and the passage that leads down to and connects to the descending passage. There is a short horizontal passage and the small excavation known as the lesser subterranean chamber. The subterranean chamber has a hole in the floor known as the pit. There is the long horizontal dead-end shaft that terminates into solid bedrock. There is also the irregular mounds in the western end of the subterranean chamber. What were the builders trying to accomplish? Were they building a treasure room deep below the Great Pyramid but changed their minds? Were they creating star alignments for some religious or symbolic purpose so they could tell us something? Were they trying to make significant correlations and alignments for some esoteric or profound purpose? The descending passage is built with extreme precision, yet the interior of the subterranean chamber appears to be unfinished. The design of these passages appears to be very odd, but I think they served an important purpose which allowed the Great Pyramid to be assembled. In our first video series, we described how the Great Pyramid was assembled using water locks and barges. But water locks require a source of water as high as the highest water lock to function. Our first video series concentrated on the fascinating explanation of how water locks were used and how the stones were moved and set in place using water and barges. But this video series goes into greater detail and describes how water was able to be supplied to the water locks, which allowed the Great Pyramid to be assembled easily and quickly. These cuttings, created below the location of where the Great Pyramid was to be built, were created to be a water pump to supply water for the water locks during construction. Because of this, I call this subterranean water pump the construction pump. Let's take a more detailed look at the construction pump. Water flows down the descending passage and into the subterranean chamber. Then water flows from the subterranean chamber up through the grotto and out of the subterranean water pump. This is the path water flows through the construction pump. Water enters the subterranean cuttings at the upper end of the descending passage. Water exits the water pump built into the solid bedrock through the grotto and up through the mound in the construction site. These are the major features of the subterranean cuttings. They were built before the Great Pyramid was assembled by the geniuses who created this wonder of the world. The original purpose of these cuttings was to supply water for the water locks and to allow the Great Pyramid to be assembled. But how did these seemingly oddly shaped cuttings in solid bedrock pump water? How did the construction pump operate? The next video introduces us to the fascinating explanation of the operation of the subterranean water pump built by ancient geniuses.